All right, welcome to the Pricing for the Planet podcast, the podcast that explores the intersection of business and sustainability. Today, we will talk about double materiality, a concept coming from CSRD. So we are very excited to cover this topic with Julia. Julia, thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you again. We did an episode about ICP with you, a very successful episode. So I'm delighted to have you on the podcast again.
Thank you. I'm excited to talk about a very new and interesting topic we have on here, which is double materiality.
For sure. Julia, you know the drill. In this podcast, we start from the end. So what would be the key takeaway that you would like the audience to remember from this episode?
So first off is the concept of double materiality is built on two pillars. So we have the impact materiality, which looks at the question of what is the impact of the company and the value chain on the environment and society. So that kind of first perspective. And then the second perspective, why it's called double materiality, is looking at it from the perspective of financial materiality. So what are the ESG risks and opportunities for the company? So when we talk about double materiality, we really want to connect also the impacts and the risks and opportunities for that company and really bring it into one concept. So the key takeaway here is that double materiality looks at both perspectives and also financial materiality, and that it's really in a way also a risk management process for a company, because through the materiality process, you're able to better understand your impacts, risks, and opportunities.
Awesome. So maybe can you explain, what's your background, where you are coming from, and, why did you decide to implement CSRD, and, why did you decide to deep dive into double materiality matrix?
Yeah, so I'm Julia. I've been working and researching in the ESG field for 5 years now. I did a master's in sustainable resource management, and that basically brought me to where I am today. And I work at a automotive components company called NEMAC. So we specialize in the development and production of aluminum-based components, specifically for e-mobility, structural components, as well as internal combustion engine components. And fun fact, NEMAC components are in every fourth car worldwide. So it's not a well-known B2B, it's not a well-known B2C supplier, but I mean, we're in every fourth car. So that's kind of a good achievement from our side. So it's a mid-sized company with the location the headquarters based in Mexico, but we do have more than 30 locations worldwide, which means we also operate in the European Union. And we have locations here, and that is why we fall under the CSRD as well, and that's why it's really a hot topic as well for us. In terms of myself, I lead the sustainability reporting at NEMAC, so that means I'm kind of like the central project manager, managing and collecting all the information from all the departments in terms of what's happened in the ESG front over the year. And also I'm creating more of a structure to the sustainability report, and also making sure that we're aligned and reporting against the ESG standards. So previously we reported against the GRI, or the Global Reporting Initiative, and now we're slowly shifting towards the CSRD, as I mentioned, because it is now mandatory for us in the coming years. So I think that pretty much summarizes where I am at now.
Perfect. And disclaimer, we met multiple times at the annual summit of Pricing for the Planet. So thank you for being such a supporter of Pricing for the Planet.
No, it's a very good initiative. I love it. Yeah.
So Julia, because we hear CSRD, ESG, double materiality, GRI. So can we start from the very beginning, the entry level? And so what is CSRD and what is double materiality?
Mm-hmm. So just before I start, I just want to mention a disclaimer that any views that I express are my own and not connected to NEMAC. So what is CSRD? So CSRD, it's the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. It's a European law enforced by the EU. Basically, that is now making it mandatory for companies to report on sustainability metrics. And it's also relevant for companies that have, let's say, locations in the European Union, but are not, let's say, headquartered in the EU. So that applies to companies like NEMAC. So it's really gotten a lot of attention and traction. And under the CSRD, you have the ESRS reporting standards, so the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. And basically, those are the actual standards themselves. So CSRD is the regulation, and the ESRS are the standards. So I think sometimes it's easy to confuse those two. Realistically, we're speaking of the same thing. And basically, under these standards, you have to do what's called a double materiality assessment. And essentially, that is the first process of reporting against these standards. And what is the double materiality? Well, it basically asks the question of what topics are important for the company and which topics does it make sense for the company to report, as well as to develop initiatives, policies, and response strategies, essentially. So why is this important? Well, as a person doing sustainability reporting, you also want to make sure that you're dedicating your resources where it makes sense. And you don't want to spend your efforts reporting or, creating policies on things that really don't matter. Or not to say they don't matter, but maybe are not so material for the company. So for example, if you're a software company, you probably wouldn't have so much to do with biodiversity. And so for you to have biodiversity indicators that you report on as a software company might not necessarily make sense. So basically, it simplifies the reporting because you're able to exclude certain topics that you consider as non-material for the company. So it really makes your reporting structure and how you report against the CSRD specific to your company.
Super clear. Yeah, I think, and because I think everybody's very afraid. A lot of people are coming to me saying, I think there is like 1,100 points from the ESRS. And again, ESRS, keep in mind, it's either like KPIs or like it's quantitative and qualitative information or KPI. And then from those thousands plus, it's not like you have to, do every or cover every single one. You arrive with your assessment and you pick and choose from those thousand,
Exactly.
like
Yeah, and I think that kind of to speak to our approach, we also looked at like the subtopics. So within the ESRS, you have certain within the ESRS standard. So for example, E2, which is pollution, you'll have like pollution to waste, pollution to water, pollution to air. So it gets really granular and complex if you try to look at it on the very like small subtopic level. So yeah, I think it's important to kind of like keep that big picture. And then if you look at it from those small topic levels, sometimes you might realize, okay, pollution is important, but let's say pollution to soil is not important. So CSRD gives you that flexibility to say, you know what, actually, this is not important for us as an organization. You have to make that very clear as to why it's not important, and you have to provide also, very good transparency as to how you decided that this topic was not material. But I think it's important to keep in mind that you still do have that flexibility, and that it's not that the CSRD is enforcing that you have to comply and report against all these 1,000 KPIs. That you really need to create a report that makes sense for your organization.
Yeah, and on this one, I think the EU is quite advanced around this idea of double materiality, because I think the US, I mean, like the global leaded by the US team with the IFRS, they are talking about single materiality. So, what will be the impact on my kind of like company financial like health? So the EU is going one step further with this double materiality. It's like, yes, there is a financial aspect, but there is also like, how do you affect your environment, your biodiversity, your partners, your ecosystem, etc., etc. So I think that's super interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important concept that we need to consider, right? Because it's not just about the financial materiality of the company. And in many cases, also, as we've seen, the impacts are actually linked to the risks and opportunities. So let's say if we release CO2 emissions, that's actually linked to, carbon-related regulation or opportunities in new markets. And I think that's really what double materiality allows you to see, is that connection between the impact that your company and your value chain has on environment and society, and to link that and kind of provide justification and say, hey, this actually has a business implication. Like, this is no longer just, are we the good guy or the bad guy? It really has some kind of connection to the financial health of the business.
Awesome. So, Julia, open the book, please. How hard was it? What was the process? Where did you start? Like, tell us the truth.
Yeah, as it is. So basically, I think one important thing to define or describe is that there is no one set process to do double materiality. And we've seen double materiality, let's say in GRI, like the Global Reporting Initiative, which was a non-mandatory initiative, but a lot of investors would ask for it before. And there they also have the concept of double materiality, but it wasn't so clearly defined. And the framework as to how you do the double materiality assessment, at least from my view, wasn't so precise. On the other hand, the way it's described in the ESRS guidance, and I mean, if you're doing a double materiality assessment and you haven't yet looked at the guidance that EFRAG, which is basically the organization that created the standards, they published materiality guidance. It's very helpful to kind of understand the criteria. And I do believe that a lot of auditors will also be using it. Again, my opinion, but let's see. And yeah, basically, we first started off by reading that guidance and really understanding what goes into a double materiality assessment. And like I said, we see it as a lot more granular in comparison to the others, but it's still general so that every company can kind of, take it in. And basically, it's up to the company to design the process itself. And also important to mention the process is subject to auditability because under the CSRD, you need to get third-party verification of your sustainability report, and it would be subject to the same kind of level of scrutiny as a financial report. So that means for us, number one was also understanding, okay, what is the process and how do we properly document it as well? So we started off by reading the guidance, then doing a benchmark and really researching and looking what other companies are declaring as materials, so our peers and competitors. We looked at some benchmark reports for CSRD. So some companies have already published kind of preliminary CSRD reports. And we also looked at overlap with the GRI. So that's something tricky for us as well because we're trying to report, it's like this transitional period between GRI is still there and we want to use GRI because it's really a global reporting initiative. And we still want to hit the requirements from the CSRD. So how do we kind of find that overlap? So that's why we kind of created a long list, understanding what our peers are doing, what are the standards saying, and also screening to see if we missed any topics that potentially were not included from the CSRD. But essentially, we started off with the CSRD or the ESRS subtopics as the first kind of long list of our topics. And then from that, we structured a series of workshops, basically, with subject matter experts within the company. So that means we got a bunch of people from different departments into the room and said, okay, let's talk about climate change. And when we talk about climate change, the way we structure the conversation, we said, okay, first we're going to look at impacts. So what impacts do we have as an organization as well as our value chain? So we also looked into the aluminum value chain as well as the automotive. So that was a little bit of the tricky part, is to kind of, keep this scope very big. Yeah, and we asked the question of what is the impact? Like, what is the impact on society and environment? And then we sort of clustered these impacts into little groups. And then we evaluated these little groups on scale, scope, irremediability, and likelihood. So that kind of gave us a mathematical backing behind how did we evaluate this impact driver group. We evaluated kind of those impact driver groups mathematically, so then we're able to compare them with other impacts from other topics. And then we did the same thing with risks and opportunities. So that was kind of the process that we followed. And from that, we're actually we're processing the results from the workshops right now. And from that, we have a long list of impacts, a long list of risks and opportunities, and a rating behind each of them that we're then able to filter and say, okay, which of our impact or which of our risks have a higher legal risk, or which of our risks have a higher financial impact, and same thing with opportunities. same thing with impact. So which of our risks maybe have a higher severity or likelihood? So it kind of allows you through this structure, it kind of allows you to better understand your impacts, risks, and opportunities. And then the idea is that afterwards, we will also go into discussion with our executive sustainability committee and get their kind of overview and oversight of these results, and get their final approval and agreement to say, okay, we do see that this is actually material. It makes sense. Check, and you get the approval from the top. That is also something we saw, or when talking to our consultants, they did mention that it's really important to also have that kind of top level oversight of the entire double materiality process. So we're making sure to integrate that all over. So yeah, I think that's in a nutshell how we tackled it. We're still in the process. So again, I think I'm providing a perspective here, not as a CSRD expert or double materiality expert, but really as somebody within a company that's doing it, for the first time and trying to figure out, which I think a lot of people are in this situation right now.
For sure. And it's thank you. It was very interesting to have a honest opinion. What was, like, according to you, what is the biggest challenge, or what are the biggest challenges that you have encountered during this period of like working on double materiality and CSRD reporting?
I would say it's wrapping your head around like the sheer level of detail in certain cases. So imagine going through all the impacts and going, what is the scale of this impact? What is the scope of this impact? How many people does it influence? What is the likelihood? And these evaluations at the end of the day are different from everybody, and they're based on everybody's kind of personal opinion. And that's why we had, we wanted to get several perspectives of it so we didn't have so much bias. On the other hand, it's still very challenging because somebody says, well, are we looking at it, in comparison, or when we talk about, let's say, scale of impact, if we want to say, is it regional or global? Are we talking it in comparison to other companies, or are we saying, just in comparison to how we operate? So there's so many different perspectives, and I found it really challenging to integrate all of that, and especially to kind of make something that's very subjective and qualitative into something that's more quantitative. And I mean, that is the way that it seems to be described in the guidance. Like, they really want you also to look at that scale, scope, and severity, and to have those thresholds, and to how you define that and how you evaluate that. And I think that's really the challenge, at least how I see it, is it's a lot. It's really like a full risk management process for the entire company. And I mean, when we talk about ESG, right, we're literally talking about everything, like from emissions to business ethics to health and safety. So I think it felt like we were jamming the entire organization into 10 workshops, which really afterwards we realized, this is just a piece of the puzzle, and it will be a continuous kind of process. And we really are trying to see it as not just like we'd finish this project, done. And no, like to say, okay, there's a lot of already existing processes in the company that, perhaps there was already some kind of risk management happening at, for example, at certain levels or certain departments that was not necessarily labeled as sustainability, but somehow does meet the requirements if adjusted to the CSRD. So I think that was the biggest challenge, was like really wrapping everything and putting it into one double materiality assessment, as we call it.
Perfect. And did you get any learnings, or anything you would have done differently?
Oh, I don't know if anything I would have done differently, because I mean, it is a process, and I think you figure it out as you go. Like, as we went through the 10th workshop, everything was kind of crystal clear. And then, when you look at the 10th workshop and compare it to the first one, when you started and you're not sure like of the structure and, exactly what questions will come along, then of course you were like, oh man, I wish I knew what I know by the 10th one, but you can't change that process. Um, yeah, I would say like it's definitely a process, and I think it makes sense to just go and dive right into it and kind of learn as you go. I think that was maybe something I would have done differently, as I feel like we spent a lot of time kind of planning and trying to figure out how to do it not perfectly, but in the best way. And sometimes I think maybe it would have been better if we even just kind of dove in. Um, on the other hand, we did have a trial session with our one of our VPs, and it was just like using an Excel and trying to talk him through like all of the impacts, risks, and opportunities, and just the structure. Managing a conversation with such an Excel is very challenging. So we actually swapped out and used an interactive tool called Miro, which was also very helpful because then you're able to have like very interactive discussions and sessions. So yeah, my recommendation, or kind of, would be to dive right into it, see what works, see what doesn't, and at the end, it's going to take time.
Yeah. Yeah. So if I summarize what you just said, so it's like before, going, all the way, deep diving, look outside, look at benchmark, look at other companies, some big companies, I think like Danone, for example, or like some others are quite advanced. So they already did some like first level of like CSRD reporting. Get helped. I think
Yeah.
there are useful to maybe have a consultant or some consulting companies to help start. Don't wait until yeah, it will always be messy. So let's start right now and start the journey. What else? What did I miss from kind of like the big lessons? I
I
think I like your idea of saying like Excel is great to collect the data, but I think you need additional tools because CSRD is such like a strategic and
Mhm.
a mix between very granular data and discussion with C-level that you need specific tools that you might not have when you are doing pure financial report.
Mm. Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of also the point we realized. And I mean, we went through the workshop route that, again, every company can decide how they want to do it themselves. We also thought, okay, we can, do proxy research and then kind of do the ratings ourselves and then get approval on the ratings by the experts. That was also an option. We just found the workshop format very, like, a lot more interactive, and also in a way visual. And I actually found that it really worked really well from the perspective that you were able to have very interesting and insightful conversations because you were discussing very, like, well, what is the impact of the company on emissions and global emissions? And I feel like these are big questions that are always in the room, but we never actually stop to discuss them, of like, what is our impact, right? So it was really interesting how everyone kind of came together and to see the different perspectives from the different departments. It was really, really insightful. So I really liked the workshop route, but then again, it might not be the right option for companies. I'm 100% on board, though, that I think Excel is a great tool. But there, especially with CSRD, I think we really need something out there, or more that allows for more levels of integration of data, or more also cross-functional working together and collaboration.
Yeah, for sure, 100%. And so it's a big topic. So we talk a lot about CSRD, and I what we get from the market is like, yes, we are doing a lot of work doing reporting, but like, is it really helping to drive the sustainability agenda, or to start the transformation of company towards sustainability? What's
Mm.
your view on this one now that you're almost done with it?
So we're just starting with CSRD. So with double materiality, we're almost done, but I think the CSRD animal is just about to come for us. In terms of, yeah, in general, I feel like CSRD has gotten a lot of criticism because of, the size of it and how complex it is in certain areas. I think that's why also double materiality is important, to make it more lean. So basically, I think the first few years will be companies trying to figure out what's going on and how do we actually report against it. And then I think once companies have figured that out, then I think then we'll actually switch more into this like driving innovation, or like driving innovation and making change within the company mode. Also, because you're going to be able to see what your peers or competitors are doing at a more transparent level, which I think people are forgetting that it's not just a regulation. It also means that you will have access to this information because now you'll be able to see what your competitor is doing very specifically, and you can better benchmark and understand what maybe you need to do. So I really see that we'll see the benefits there. I also see that it is really bringing together the financial aspect because within the within the ESRS standards, there's a lot of linking to financial reporting as well. And in terms of also within the double materiality assessment, you want to evaluate the financial impact. So there you kind of should set thresholds on how you define a low financial impact for the company versus a high financial impact. And that's where you need finance. And so even through the double materiality process, we saw we were engaging so much with the other departments and having these conversations that I really see it's really starting to integrate itself into the daily business. And I really think that CSRD, especially with that pressure now that it is a compliance issue and it's not no longer, oh, that'd be nice to have. It's really like, you got to do it. And I think that is really driving a lot of action now because I think people are a little bit in chaos and fear of this CSRD animal. And now I think with time, once that kind of chaos settles down and people figure it out, and it starts to become like an annual process, I really believe that we'll be able to drive change and also foster the innovation and understand, like, as a market, how we're moving and where we need to improve.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, I love your answer, because I think a lot of people imagine like, oh, we will start being sustainable. But I think the CSRD is just the reality check, which is you need to start with the baseline. And I think you mentioned it with your workshop. I love your idea about the workshop because you just open discussion. What is our impact as a company? What is our impact locally? At global scale, on the entire value chain, on the ecosystem of XYZ. And if you don't start here with one, awareness, two, data and baseline, there is no way you can go up.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think all the kind of the haters of CSRD, I think for me, I don't get it. Like I think they are missing the point. I think yes, it's heavy for companies, but if we want to have greener companies, there is no way we can avoid this granular analysis, critical thinking about the role of the company. So I think it's just like it's an enabler in a way. It's a requirement. It's a prerequisite, but it's a good prerequisite if we want to really start this big movement toward a greener.
And I think especially for a lot of companies that were already, doing some kind of sustainability reporting, and I mean right now, in the phases that CSRD is being implemented, it will be mandatory for those companies that were probably already doing something. And that's the case for us, that we also see that we actually have a lot done, that it's not like we're starting from zero. And I think that's also the fear sometimes, is people think that, you have a blank paper and you got to start. And in reality, like, there's so many systems, and especially within a big organization, like there's so many processes you probably don't know of that somehow have a connection or could be connected to CSRD. You might need to tweak them a little bit, sure, but in reality, I think it's important to keep in mind that some things already exist, or at least, I mean, again, I'm speaking of from my own experience, like a mid-sized organization. But I think personally, working with CSRD, yes, there are certain instances where you're like, what exactly are they trying to say with this disclosure requirement? And it is complex. However, I think that's why also double materiality is important, because that's where if you can justify a lot of things as to why you're excluding them. If you don't see them as necessary for your company, that's absolutely your choice. It just, also has to be auditable and reasonable justification. But I think that's where, if people are saying CSRD is impossible, then I think, there's a lot of argumentation against that.
Absolutely. And Julia, I know it's been already 30 minutes, so if you would be kind enough to finish with the last question, which is any advice on any company starting this double materiality and CSRD paths?
Mm-hmm. So, first of all, I think you'll probably need more time than you think. I think that's a lesson we learned very early on with the double materiality assessment because we thought, oh, we'll just be done with it in, a few months. And realistically, it's kind of dragging on to be a little bit longer. But it's also because we want to make sure it's a process that really is done with quality and adds value. And, we want to understand the requirements and make sure that we're fully prepared for third-party verification. Another really important thing, and I think this goes for like in general reporting, that it doesn't need to be perfect, and then you just kind of need to start from somewhere and to build a basis, and then you go in and you optimize your result and you optimize your processes. And I think that's also the fear with CSRD, that people think that you're going to from one day to the next you're going to wake up with a CSRD report. Like that's not going to happen. It takes time, and it takes time to optimize those processes, and it's okay to have gaps. And also within any third party certification, you're probably going to have recommendations for improvements and how you can do things better. So again, there's no expectation for it to be perfect. So yeah, I would say my main advice is it's really a learning process, an evolving process. Also there, I don't see, CSRD is not really out there for that long. So I think there's a very limited knowledge in the market, and I feel like we're kind of all in the same boat right now, where everybody's going off of a few years of trying to figure out CSRD report, ESG reporting. So yeah, I think to look at it as a process, don't try to make it perfect, and yeah, I think also be patient with it.
Perfect. Julia, thank you so much. It was very, very interesting and enlightening, I'm sure, for the audience. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Fabian.
And for the audience, we hope you like this episode. If you want to continue the journey, like the learning journey with us, you know the drill. You can go on www.pricingfortheplanet.com. We have a bi-weekly newsletter called the Bi-Weekly Digest, where we are talking about those kind of topics, and we are trying to understand what's going on and share information about it. Julia, if the audience, if they want to follow you, should they follow you on LinkedIn maybe?
Yes, you can follow me on LinkedIn or check out my website, julianitz.com.
Perfect. A huge thank you again. Continue the learning journey and be well.
Thank you.